Are you worried? Let's start with Amazon and OpenAI. Are you worried about the circularity of deals once again at play here?
Yeah, well, I think that whenever there's some type of creative financing, there's always some scrutiny that's on there. But I kind of view it as, there is a synergistic partnership here, and that, OpenAI is growing rapidly. They need the compute, and it makes sense that they want to look for multi-source. And so I think going to Amazon does make sense. In addition, I think they want some of that upside. And so you're seeing, like, whenever there's like a new frontier of technology, there's often, companies that need to come together and build the ecosystem. And I think that this is an instance of this. And so, I think it's definitely something to watch. But I think that what matters at the end of the day is that AI continues to progress, the scaling laws hold, the use of ChatGPT, LLMs continue to grow, and I think that when you look at these tools that are coming out of the companies, they are like transformational in terms of how we are rethinking work. So I think what really matters is that the end demand continues to be really strong, and that we're seeing progress on AI.
I'm looking at your holdings, and the number one holding that you have at the moment is Alphabet. Interesting news with a new Gemini release this morning, which we'll get into. But NVIDIA is your second biggest. Now, are you worried about NVIDIA losing any sort of market share to Alphabet, to Amazon, to some of these other chip players?
Yeah, well, I think first, the market is growing. And so, this is an exponential growth curve. So I don't think that it's a winner take all. And so, multiple companies can do well. And in some ways, I think when you step back and think about what's going on, there is kind of a space race for AI, but they're going to multiple areas, multiple moons. And so they're all doing their own kind of domain expertise. I think, like with the TPU, it's very optimized, for a specific stack and for the Google ecosystem. And then I think NVIDIA is like kind of more the merchant, like broader platform, can run everything. And I think both can have a place. And you can see that, Google's been doing really well over the last 5 years. So has NVIDIA, so has AMD, so has Broadcom. And so to me, I think that, there's not a winner take all here.
Okay, I love that sort of element of there are many races, maybe many moons, Tony. But talk to us about the moon shot that Oracle is making at the moment and the anxiety that people might not be wanting to lend to their future of leasing, and the sheer scale of capacity that they're building with other partners, of course, out there, like Related Digital. Have you got any anxiety around Oracle? I know it's in your portfolio last time that it was published.
Yeah, so I think that, Oracle definitely sees the demand signals that are probably really strong. And so they're looking to meet that demand, in the near term with leases, and then over the long term, probably with owning their own capacity. And so to me, they see this as a big opportunity that is once in a generation. And so they're building for it. And they're, kind of being creative with it. And so to me, it definitely, the market is super concerned. I think that there's probably somewhat of an overreaction. And I think as long as, the demand is there in years 3 to 5, I think that that's what will make kind of the Oracle bet make sense.
So all of this anxiety writ large around sort of whether it's more experimental financing, creative financing, circular financing, is it actually a buying opportunity for you, Tony?
I think we're constantly managing risk and, rotating the portfolio to what has the highest ROI, what has the best risk-adjusted return. I still think that AI is continue to be a really good area to place capital. It's a lot of multi-year inflection. That being said, it's also been 2-3 years since ChatGPT has been launched, and so we are kind of further along in AI, but I still think we're pretty early. And so, a lot of my views, are expressed over the multi-year, and think that you want to invest in companies that have strong competitive advantages that capture the value with their ecosystem. And I think that not everyone's going to be a winner in the space race. Like some rockets might not make it. But to me, I think it still is a really great overall theme to be invested in.
Well, at the moment, you think the rockets to be betting on are in order of importance: Alphabet, NVIDIA, Broadcom, Apple, Microsoft. But how will that change as the application of AI comes? Thus far, it has all been about the AI infrastructure. but there's going to have to be proof in the pudding, the productivity. Are your science and tech fund going to end up looking like healthcare companies, like financial companies, like actually the users of this tech?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, often I think about where the economic profit pools are shifting, or where is the second derivative, like, accelerating to. And you've been right. Like, the last few years have been really heavy infrastructure build outs. And that's where a lot of the companies have accrued a lot of value. You think about, NVIDIA, Broadcom, those have been like, examples. And then you're also seeing the components that are going in the system, like, memory, HBM, networking. Those companies are seeing a lot of like traction and economic profit accruing there. And then I think the next phase probably is on the application layer. And so, there are large language models like, ChatGPT, Anthropic, XAI that are all working on this. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. And I think you might even see some, previously, viewed as kind of on the wrong side of AI, like perhaps be able to capture value. I think there's software companies that have kind of been written off here in enterprise that, if you're a Fortune 500 company, often you're going to go to your software vendor once you've figured out, what play you want to implement AI. So I think that there could be, new companies that form on the application layer, but there could also be incumbents that are now leveraging AI, seeing the compute costs go down, and the capabilities and models be more domain specific. So I think it's an exciting time to be in technology. It's constantly evolving, and I think that there will be also great opportunities that we don't think about right now.
Well, you're in some of the software play, in particular Salesforce, which has been a bit beaten up for perhaps being not at the tip of the spear of things, AI, in terms of the monetization. But where's really been monetizing has been the picks and shovels and memory of late. You just mentioned memory. We've got Micron after the bell. Are you feeling positive about how much more we're seeing price strength from these sorts of companies?
Yeah, we're definitely on an upward trajectory in memory prices. So I think what's going on there is that HBM, the stuff that goes into these GPUs and AI systems, they soak up a lot of wafer capacity. And so as a result, it's creating shortages in broader DRAM, and then also that's creating shortages in broader NAND. And so that you're seeing this ripple effect into other areas, like SanDisk, for example, has seen tremendous appreciation in their stock price. So I think that there will be these areas where the economic profit can be distributed to even more that didn't participate as much over the last few years.
What's really interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've gone to the Bloomberg terminal and I've looked at the members that make up your fund. Lambda Inc., a private company, is in there. You, of course, at T. Rowe Price, know the opportunity there is in these crossover financings and the desire there is for private companies and exposure to it. So are you going to be seeing these companies going public? Are you looking more for private holdings as well as public?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. At T. Rowe, I think one of our biggest competitive advantages that we are, both public, and we're also one of the biggest financiers in the private markets. And so we partnered up with Lambda. I think that they've got a really interesting cloud stack that is unique. And they're on the right side of change of building these data centers really to what you would want a true AI data center to be like. So without a lot of the baggages that you would have to hold in traditional compute. And so, I think the future is bright for them. The team's executing extremely well, and excited that, they continue to progress, in terms of, timing on public markets. Like, I think that they'll do it when they're ready.